The evacuation sirens wailed across the underground bunkers of Cthelia Prime, their mournful tones echoing through corridors that once displayed the finest artistic achievements of the Cthar Empire. Supreme Commander Zalter stood motionless before the tactical hologram, his scaled fingers clenched tightly behind his back, the bony ridges of his shoulders tense beneath his ceremonial armor. The display showed what he already knew. The final defensive grid had been breached. The Xylar swarm had penetrated their last line of resistance. 15 years of brutal warfare had reduced the once magnificent Cthar Empire to this, a handful of scattered outposts, with Cthelia Prime as their last significant stronghold before the Imperial Core worlds. Zalter had watched system after system fall to the insectoid Xylar Alliance, a relentless tide of chitin and hunger that consumed everything in its path. Updates from the orbital defense platforms, Commander, reported Subcommander Vezak, her usually melodious voice strained with exhaustion. The female Cthar's emerald scales had dulled from stress and minimal nutrition, like most of the survivors. Platforms 3 through 17 have gone silent. The others report critical damage and ammunition reserves at less than 20%. Zalter nodded grimly. The Cthar were a proud reptilian species that had once built an empire spanning hundreds of worlds. Their civilization had valued philosophy, art, and honor above all. Now, those values seemed like luxuries from a forgotten age. Their once great fleets were reduced to a handful of damaged vessels. Their population was decimated, their colonies overwhelmed, their resources exhausted. And the ground defenses? He asked, knowing the answer would bring no comfort. The Northern Hemisphere is entirely compromised, Vezak replied, manipulating the hologram to display the spread of Xylar landing zones across the planet's surface. Our forces are holding at the Karaz Mountains, but intelligence suggests a major push within the next 3 cycles. The underground network remains secure for now, but several access points have reported attempted breaches. Zalter stared at the sea of red indicators across the hologram, each representing a Xylar landing craft or established nest. The Xylar Alliance, an amalgamation of various insectoid species united by their expansionist ideology, had proven unstoppable. They operated with a hive mentality, using overwhelming numbers as their primary tactic. What they lacked in individual combat prowess, they made up for with biological weapons and sheer unstoppable mass. They saw other species merely as resources, food, hosts for their larvae, or biomatter to be processed and integrated into their ever-growing war machine. Commander, called out communications officer Trazik from his station. We're receiving a strange report from the Archives Division. Zalter turned, eyes narrowing. Archives? What could possibly be relevant now from Archives? Trazik looked uncertain. Sir, they report that 15 standard cycles ago, before the fall of Kelvor Station, the research team there sent out a signal. It was aimed at unexplored space, far beyond our charted territories. A signal to whom? The report doesn't specify clearly, sir. The transmission was heavily encrypted and sent through multiple relay points to mask its origin. The Archives only detected it during routine data recovery operations. Analysis suggests it was a distress call sent to a region believed to contain a species called humans. The command center fell silent. Even the constant background chatter of status reports and damage assessments seemed to fade away. Humans. Zalter tasted the unfamiliar word. I've never heard of such a species. Trazik consulted his datapad. There's minimal information, sir. Apparently, there was a confidential first contact initiative before the war. It was deemed low priority and abandoned when the Xylar attacks began. The scientists at Kelvor must have remembered and sent the signal as a last resort before the station fell. Zalter turned back to the hologram. Another section of their defensive line had just collapsed, indicated by a cluster of blue lights blinking out. What good is this information now? He asked, not expecting an answer. Some desperate scientists sent a call for help to an unknown species in uncharted space years ago. Even if these humans exist, even if they receive the message, why would they care about our fate? No one had a response. The weight of imminent defeat hung heavy in the recycled air of the command center. Continue evacuation of civilian centers, Zalter ordered. Prioritize the young and the knowledge repositories. And maintain monitoring of all communication channels, even the obsolete ones. If there's any response to that old signal. He didn't finish the sentence. They all understood the futility of hope at this point. As the command staff returned to their duties, Zalter remained before the hologram, watching as more and more sections of their defenses turned from blue to red. He found himself wondering about these humans, this unknown variable in a game that was all but lost. It was an academic curiosity, nothing more. Just another mystery he would take to his grave when the Xyler finally breached this command center. Little did he know that across the vast emptiness of space, something was already on its way. 3 cycles passed in a blur of continuous retreat and regrouping. The Xyler push through the Karaz Mountains had come earlier than expected, overwhelming the Kthar defenses with sheer numbers. Zalter had been forced to abandon the secondary command center and fall back to the deep underground fortress that served as their final redoubt. The tactical situation was clear. Philia Prime was lost. The only question now was how long they could hold out and how many civilians they could evacuate to the Imperial core worlds before the planet fell completely. But even that seemed increasingly hopeless. Intelligence reports indicated that the Xyler had begun establishing a blockade around the system, cutting off escape routes. "Sir," said Vezak, her voice barely above a whisper, "the civilian evacuation transports are reporting Xyler interceptors along all designated escape vectors." Zalter felt the weight of command like never before. Every decision now meant life or death, not just for soldiers who had sworn to serve, but for millions of civilians who had done nothing to deserve this fate. "Redirect all remaining combat-capable vessels to escort duty," he ordered. "Pull the defense platforms from the outer orbits if necessary. We need to create at least one clear corridor for the transports." "But Commander," protested his tactical officer, "that would leave our orbital positions completely exposed. The Xyler fleet would have a direct path to—" "I know what it means, officer," Zalter snapped, his composure finally cracking. "But what good are orbital defenses if there's no one left to protect? Make it happen." The command center buzzed with activity as his orders were relayed. Zalter turned away, needing a moment of privacy that wasn't possible in the crowded space. He moved to a small alcove that housed an ancient ceremonial blade, a relic from the early days of the Kthar Empire, when their ancestors had first reached for the stars. He ran a clawed finger along its edge, wondering if it would come to that, a ceremonial death rather than capture by the Xyler. A sudden commotion at the communications station interrupted his dark thoughts. "Commander!" Trazik's voice carried an unfamiliar tone. Was it excitement? "We're receiving a signal. It's responding on the same encrypted frequency as that distress call from Kelvor Station." Zalter was at the station in 3 long strides. "Source? Unknown, sir. It's coming from outside the system, using a communication protocol I've never seen before. It's incredibly powerful, bypassing our regular channels and somehow cutting through the Xyler jamming fields. Can you decode it?" Trazik's fingers flew across his console. "Working on it, sir. The encryption is unlike anything in our databases, but there are patterns I can work with." For the next half hour, the communications team worked feverishly to decode the mysterious signal, while Zalter and the rest of the command staff continued to coordinate their increasingly desperate defense efforts. Reports flowed in continuously. Another civilian shelter overrun, another defensive position lost, another squadron of fighters destroyed. "I've got it!" Trazik suddenly exclaimed. "At least I think I do. It's not a perfect translation, but—" "Display it," Zalter ordered. The main view screen flickered, then displayed a series of symbols that gradually resolved into readable Kthar script. "Transmission received. Distress acknowledged. We are coming." Below that simple message was a single word: humans. The command center erupted in confused chatter. "Silence," Zalter ordered. When quiet had returned, he asked, "Is there anything else? Any details about their capabilities, their numbers, their estimated arrival time? Trazik shook his head. Nothing, sir. Just those words. Vezak moved closer to Zoltar, speaking quietly. Commander, this could be a trick. The Xylar have been known to use psychological warfare. To what end? Zoltar responded. To give us false hope? We're already cornered, and this doesn't match their usual tactics. He turned back to Trazik. Can you send a response? Ask for more information. I can try, sir, but I'm not sure our systems can replicate their transmission methods. It might take time to... An alarm cut through the conversation. Another perimeter breach, this one closer to the command center than any before. We don't have time, Zoltar decided. Continue your efforts, but our priority remains defense and evacuation. He addressed the entire command staff. This message changes nothing for now. We fight with what we have, not with what we hope might come. But despite his words, something had changed. A spark of curiosity, perhaps even hope, had ignited in the command center. As they returned to their duties, Zoltar caught whispers. Who are these humans? Could they really help us? What if they're worse than the Xylar? Zoltar had no answers, only questions of his own. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, the outcome no longer seemed entirely certain. And in uncertainty, there was the faintest glimmer of possibility. The Kthar fought with renewed determination over the next cycle, but the reality of their situation only grew bleaker. The Xylar had established complete orbital supremacy, destroying or capturing all but 3 of the evacuation transports. The surface of Cthelia Prime was now almost entirely under enemy control, with the Kthar resistance confined to the deepest underground complexes. In the command center, now operating on emergency power, Zoltar and his remaining officers planned what would likely be their final stand. The last reports indicated that Xylar burrowers were making progress through the outer layers of the fortress. It was only a matter of time. The High Command on the core worlds has acknowledged our situation, Vezak reported, setting down a communication pad. They thank us for our sacrifice and assure us that our defense of Cthelia Prime has bought valuable time for the core worlds to strengthen their defenses. The unspoken message was clear. No reinforcements would be coming. They were on their own. Very well, Zoltar said, struggling to keep his voice steady. We will continue to make our sacrifice meaningful. Redirect power from the lower levels to the defensive shields around the civilian shelters. We'll make our stand here in the command center. If we can hold out for 2 more cycles, at least some of the remaining transports might slip through the blockade during the Xylar fleet's scheduled resupply window. The officers nodded grimly. None spoke the obvious. They would not live to see whether their plan succeeded. Zoltar was about to issue further orders when the entire command center shook violently. Dust and fragments of ceiling rained down as the lights flickered. Report, he demanded, steadying himself against the console. Unknown, sir, called the sensor officer. That wasn't a Xylar attack. At least not any weapon signature we recognize. It came from orbit. Before anyone could process this information, the communications array erupted with activity. Multiple signals, Commander. Trazik shouted over the sudden chaos. The Xylar fleet is... They're breaking formation. Their communications are in disarray. The main view screen activated automatically, switching to an external feed from one of the few remaining orbital platforms. What it showed caused every Kthar in the command center to freeze in astonishment. The space above Cthelia Prime, so recently dominated by the organic-looking vessels of the Xylar fleet, was now filled with ships of a design none of them had ever seen before. Angular, utilitarian, constructed of dark gray metals with minimal ornamentation, they bore none of the aesthetic considerations of Kthar vessels, nor the unsettling biological integration of Xylar craft. They simply existed, radiating an aura of brutal efficiency. Massive spatial distortion readings, reported the sensor officer, his voice a mixture of awe and fear. These ships didn't use any jump method we're familiar with. They just appeared. Numbers and capabilities? Zoltar demanded, his tactical mind racing to process this development. Uncertain, sir. At least 300 vessels, ranging from destroyer to dreadnought class, by our classification standards. Energy readings are off the scale. Our sensors can't properly quantify their power output. The view screen showed the new arrivals taking position between the Xylar fleet and the planet, forming a protective screen. The Xylar are repositioning, Vezak observed. They're moving to engage. Indeed, the insectoid armada was swiftly reorienting, clustering into their typical attack formations, a series of wave-like groups designed to overwhelm through sequential, relentless assault. "Is it them?" someone whispered. "The humans?" No one answered. All eyes were fixed on the screen as the Xylar launched their attack, swarms of fighter craft and biological projectiles streaming toward the newcomers. What happened next defied comprehension. Beams of coherent energy, missiles trailing otherworldly propulsion systems, and weapons that defied classification erupted from the human vessels. The first wave of Xylar attackers simply ceased to exist, not destroyed in the conventional sense, but utterly obliterated. The second wave met the same fate. By the third, the Xylar attack had lost all cohesion, fighters scattering in disarray. The human fleet advanced methodically, targeting the largest Xylar vessels first. The massive hive ships, each capable of carrying hundreds of thousands of warriors and causing untold devastation to Cthar worlds, were reduced to expanding clouds of debris by precisely targeted weapon strikes. "This is impossible," breathed the tactical officer. "The largest Xylar hive ships have defenses that can withstand continuous bombardment from our entire fleet for days. These vessels are destroying them with single salvos." Zalter could only watch in stunned silence as the tide of battle, no, not battle, slaughter, continued to unfold. The Xylar, faced with an enemy they could neither overwhelm nor effectively damage, began to retreat. But the human vessels gave them no quarter, methodically pursuing and eliminating every ship regardless of size or threat level. "Commander," Trazik called out, "we're receiving a transmission. It's on all frequencies, using our standard communication protocols." "Put it through," Zalter ordered, his throat dry. The view screen shifted to show a figure unlike any alien species the Cthar had encountered. It stood upright like them, but lacked scales or a tail. Its skin appeared soft, vulnerable, with patches of fur concentrated on the top of its head. Its facial features were flat, with forward-facing eyes, a protruding nasal structure, and a lipless mouth. It wore what appeared to be a form-fitting uniform of dark material, with minimal insignia. "This is Admiral Helena Vega of the United Earth Defense Fleet." The creature spoke, its words perfectly translated into Cthar language. "We received your distress call and have come to render assistance. The Xylar threat in this system will be neutralized shortly. Please maintain your current positions and avoid any orbital operations until we have secured space around your planet. We will commence ground operations immediately to eliminate remaining Xylar forces on the surface." Vega out. The transmission ended before Zalter could respond, leaving the command center in shocked silence. "Ground operations?" Vezak finally said. "They're coming down to the surface?" As if in answer, the sensor array lit up with new alerts. "Multiple atmospheric entries detected," reported the sensor officer. "Thousands of small craft descending to the surface. They're targeting Xylar concentrations with extreme precision." Zalter made a quick decision. "Redirect our remaining surface forces to fall back and avoid engagement. I don't want any incidents of friendly fire with these humans. Make sure all Cthar positions are broadcasting identification signals." New reports began flooding in almost immediately as the human forces engaged the Xylar ground troops. Cthar observers, expecting to witness a prolonged battle, instead reported scenes of unprecedented devastation. Human soldiers, encased in powered armor that concealed their features, moved with coordinated precision that made the Cthari's own elite forces look amateurish by comparison. They were supported by autonomous combat robots, aerial drones, and armored vehicles that seemed impervious to Xylar bioweapons. Their weapons, ranging from energy-based rifles to explosive projectiles, tore through Xylar warriors as if their chitinous armor were paper. Most shocking were their tactics. Where the Cthar had fought defensively, trying to contain the Xylar advance, the humans attacked with ruthless aggression, specifically targeting command nodes, queens, and resource centers. They showed no interest in capturing territory or establishing defensive positions, only in the complete and systematic eradication of the Xylar presence. They're moving straight for the main Xylar hive cluster in the northern hemisphere, reported the tactical officer, watching the real-time battle map. That's the most heavily defended Xylar position on the planet. We estimated it would take a week of sustained bombardment just to breach their outer defenses. How many human forces are involved in the assault? Zalter asked. Unknown, sir. Our sensors have difficulty tracking their stealth units. Visible forces number perhaps 500 combatants. 500, Vezak repeated incredulously, against a hive cluster of potentially millions. They watched as the human strike force advanced without pause, cutting through wave after wave of Xylar defenders. When they reached the outer defenses of the hive, they deployed what appeared to be tactical nuclear or antimatter devices, weapons the Cthar had long abandoned due to their environmental consequences. The humans showed no such restraint. Within minutes, the primary chambers of the hive were exposed, and specialized units descended into the depths, methodically exterminating everything they encountered. The Xylar Supreme Commanders. Signal has gone dark, announced the communications officer, disbelief evident in his voice. Repeat, the Xylar command structure appears to have been decapitated. Throughout the command center, stunned silence gave way to cautious murmurs of hope. Zalter studied the tactical displays, watching as Xylar resistance across the planet began to crumble. Without centralized direction, the individual hive units fell into disarray, some fighting on instinctively, others attempting to burrow and hide, still others turning on each other in primal panic. How long has it been? Zalter asked quietly, not taking his eyes from the display. Sir, Vezak seemed confused by the question. Since the humans arrived. How much time has passed? The sub-commander checked her chronometer. Just under 3 standard hours, Commander. 3 hours. After 15 years of brutal, losing warfare, after watching their civilization brought to its knees, after preparing for extinction, the tide had turned in 3 hours. Incoming transmission from the human fleet, Trazik announced. The view screen once again displayed Admiral Vega. This time, her expression seemed slightly less severe. Commander Zalter of the Cthar Empire, she began, apparently having learned his identity in the interim. The space around Cthelia Prime is now secure. All Xylar vessels have been neutralized. Ground operations are proceeding as planned, with an estimated completion time of 6 more hours for total eradication of Xylar forces on your world. Zalter stepped forward. Admiral Vega, on behalf of the Cthar Empire, I extend our deepest gratitude for your intervention. Your arrival has saved not just this planet, but possibly our entire species. The human's expression didn't change. We responded to a distress call as per our protocols. The Xylar have been designated a Class A threat species under human classification. Their eradication is consistent with our security directives. The clinical detachment in her voice sent a chill down Zalter's spine. These weren't saviors motivated by compassion or allies bound by shared interests. This was something else entirely. May I ask, he ventured, why we have never encountered your species before? The Cthar Empire has explored vast regions of space over thousands of years. Human territory is intentionally isolated and protected by spatial barriers that prevent casual discovery, Vega replied. We maintain observation posts throughout this galactic sector, but do not generally involve ourselves in interspecies conflicts. The distress signal sent by your scientists reached one of our deep monitoring stations. After analysis of the Xylar threat, intervention was authorized. And what happens now? Zalter asked, the question that had been forming in his mind since the humans first appeared. Admiral Vega's expression softened marginally. Once the Xylar are eliminated from this system, we will provide emergency medical aid and basic supplies for your surviving population. After that, we will withdraw. The Cthar Empire's recovery and rebuilding is its own responsibility. Before Zalter could respond, she continued, "Be advised, however, that human monitoring of this sector will increase. Should the Xyler attempt to return, or should any other existential threat emerge, we may intervene again at our discretion." With that less-than reassuring statement, the transmission ended. "They're going to leave?" Vezak asked, bewildered. "Just like that? After saving us?" Zalter had no answer. The humans' motivations remained as mysterious as their sudden appearance had been. But one thing was abundantly clear. In the span of a few hours, the balance of power in their known galaxy had fundamentally shifted. The Xyler, the unstoppable force that had nearly wiped out the Cthar Empire, had been swatted aside like irritating insects by these newcomers. "Continue monitoring all human communications and activities," Zalter ordered. "I want to know everything we can learn about them before they depart. And prepare a team to meet with whatever delegation they send to the surface." As his staff hurried to comply, Zalter returned to the tactical display, watching as the human forces continued their methodical extermination of the Xyler across Cthelia Prime. Their efficiency was terrifying, their power overwhelming. They had saved the Cthar, yes, but at what cost? What would it mean to live in a galaxy where such a species existed? These questions would have to wait. For now, there were survivors to care for, defenses to rebuild, and an empire to somehow hold together. The war that had consumed 15 years of their lives was ending. Not with the long, grinding campaign they had envisioned in their most optimistic moments, but in a single day of overwhelming force applied by an unknown variable. The humans had joined the war, and it had ended in hours. The surface of Cthelia Prime bore little resemblance to the lush, vibrant world it had been before the Xyler invasion. Vast swathes of the planet had been stripped bare by the insectoids' resource harvesting operations, leaving behind barren wastelands and toxic sludge pools. Cities that had stood for millennia lay in ruins, their elegant spires and domes reduced to rubble. The famous floating gardens of the capital, once considered one of the wonders of the Cthar Empire, were now nothing but blackened craters. Zalter stood at the entrance to the underground command bunker, breathing unfiltered planetary air for the first time in months. It tasted of ash and chemicals, but it was still the air of home. Around him, Cthar soldiers and civilians alike were emerging cautiously from their underground shelters, blinking in the harsh sunlight, struggling to comprehend that the constant fear they had lived with for so long had suddenly, inexplicably lifted. "The human forces have established a perimeter around the main landing site," reported Vezak, who stood at his side. "They're requesting that a Cthar delegation meet with them there." Zalter nodded. "Assemble an honor guard, those who can still wear ceremonial armor without embarrassment. We should present what dignity we can muster." As preparations were made, Zalter couldn't help but reflect on the events of the past day. The humans had been true to their word, methodically eliminating every Xyler presence on the planet within their estimated time frame. Their ground forces had operated with the same ruthless efficiency as their fleet, targeted strikes, eliminating hive clusters and command nodes with surgical precision. The few Xyler that attempted to surrender were simply executed on the spot, a policy that disturbed many Cthar observers, despite their hatred for the insectoids. Most unsettling was the human response to the Xyler biological weapons. Several desperate hive queens had released mutagenic spores and parasitic organisms that had previously devastated Cthar populations. The humans had responded with counteragents that not only neutralized these threats, but turned them back upon their creators, causing the Xyler's own biological weapons to consume them from within. It was a level of biowarfare sophistication that made even the Cthar's most advanced research look primitive. "Commander," called a junior officer, interrupting Zalter's thoughts, "the escort is ready." The journey to the human landing site took them through the ruined outskirts of what had once been the planetary capital. Cthar cleanup crews were already at work, removing debris and searching for survivors, but the scale of destruction was overwhelming. Here and there, they passed the remains of Xyler warriors and war machines, their chitin armor shattered by weapons that left strange, distinctive damage patterns. More disconcerting were the occasional human autonomous combat units still patrolling the area. Unlike the Cthulhu's ceremonial combat robots, which were designed to evoke ancient warriors, these machines were pure function, articulated weapon platforms that moved with unsettling grace and precision. They paid no attention to the passing Cthulhu convoy, their sensors clearly programmed to ignore anything not identified as Xyler. The human landing site came into view as they crested a ridge. Zalter had expected a sprawling encampment, but instead found a compact, organized operation centered around several shuttlecraft. Human soldiers in powered armor stood guard, their faceplates opaque, giving no hint of the beings inside. Various equipment had been deployed around the perimeter: medical stations, communication arrays, and defense systems that hummed with latent energy. As the Cthulhu convoy approached, a small delegation broke away from the human group. For soldiers in armor and two figures in what appeared to be environmental suits rather than combat gear. These, Zalter assumed, were diplomatic personnel. He descended from his transport, flanked by Vezak and two honor guards. The humans approached to a respectful distance and stopped. One of the figures in environmental gear stepped forward and removed their helmet, revealing features similar to Admiral Vega's, but with darker skin coloration and different facial structure. The human extended a hand in what Zalter recognized, from hurried briefings based on archived data, as a greeting gesture. "Commander Zalter, I presume," the human said, voice slightly distorted by a translation device. "I am Dr. Elijah Kennedy, xenobiological specialist with the United Earth Defense Fleet. On behalf of Admiral Vega and the human government, I welcome this opportunity for direct communication." Zalter performed the traditional Cthulhu greeting, a shallow bow with arms extended, palms upward, before responding. "The Cthulhu Empire extends its deepest gratitude for your intervention, Dr. Kennedy. Your forces have accomplished in hours what we could not achieve in 15 years of warfare." Dr. Kennedy's expression remained neutral. "The Xyler represent a particular threat profile that our military is specifically equipped to counter. Their biological nature and hive structure create vulnerabilities that human weaponry can exploit with maximum efficiency." There was something disturbing about the clinical way the human discussed the annihilation of an entire invasion force, but Zalter pushed the thought aside. "Nevertheless," he said, "your aid came at our moment of greatest need. The Cthulhu Empire stands in your debt." Kennedy seemed uncomfortable with this statement. "No debt is recognized by the human government." Our response was consistent with established protocols regarding Class A threats. The Xyler's expansion pattern and resource consumption habits make them incompatible with galactic stability. The second unarmored human stepped forward, removing their helmet as well. This one appeared female, with features that Zalter's untrained I found difficult to distinguish from Dr. Kennedy's, except for longer head fur and slightly different facial structure. "I am Dr. Sophia Chun, diplomatic liaison," she introduced herself. "What my colleague is trying to express, in our typically roundabout way, is that we consider the Xyler to be the equivalent of what you might call vermin. Dangerous, destructive vermin that require immediate extermination when discovered. Your distress call simply alerted us to an infestation we hadn't yet detected in this sector." Zalter wasn't sure whether to be relieved or disturbed by this characterization. "Then your species has encountered the Xyler before?" "Not these specific Xyler," Dr. Kennedy clarified, "but similar hive-based insectoid species with aggressive expansion patterns. Early in our spacefaring history, human colonies suffered several devastating attacks from such species. We developed specific countermeasures and implemented a zero-tolerance policy toward any similar threats." "I see," Zalter said, though in truth he was still struggling to comprehend the implications. "And now that the threat is eliminated?" Dr. Chun gestured toward the medical stations. "As promised, we've prepared emergency supplies and medical aid for your people. Our analysis indicates severe shortages of specific nutrients and medical compounds among the surviving Cthulhu population. We've synthesized appropriate substitutes based on your biology." Beyond that, she continued, our mission parameters do not include long-term assistance or reconstruction aid. We will maintain a small observation post in this system for approximately one planetary cycle to ensure no Xylar forces return, but then we will withdraw completely. Zalter felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension at this news. The humans' power was terrifying, their detachment equally so. Yet the thought of becoming dependent on such beings, or worse, falling under their influence, was perhaps more disturbing than facing the future alone. Before you depart, he ventured, I must ask, why did your species respond to our distress call? You mentioned protocols regarding threats, but why concern yourselves with events so far from your territory? The two humans exchanged glances, a subtle communication that Zalter couldn't interpret. Commander, Dr. Kennedy said after a moment, humanity's history is complicated. We evolved on a planet with thousands of competing species, many of which went extinct due to our ancestors' actions before we even understood the consequences. When we reached the stars, we carried both that guilt and the hard-learned lessons of coexistence. The Xylar and species like them represent an existential threat to biological diversity, Dr. Chun continued. They don't seek balance or cooperation, only consumption and expansion. We have the capability to stop them, so we consider it our responsibility to do so when they threaten established civilizations. A moral imperative, then? Zalter asked. Partially, Kennedy admitted, but also pragmatic self-interest. Unchecked, the Xylar would eventually become a threat to human space as well. Better to eliminate them early, when the resource commitment is minimal. There was something both admirable and chilling in this philosophy. The Cthar had their own long history of imperialism and conquest, but even at their most aggressive, they had never approached problems with the clinical efficiency these humans displayed. One final question, if I may, Zalter said. Will we see your species again? Dr. Chin's expression softened slightly. That remains to be determined. The human government will analyze the data gathered during this operation and reassess our policy toward this sector. If the Cthar Empire recovers and expands again, we may establish formal diplomatic relations at some point. For now, we believe minimal contact is the wisest course. The meeting concluded shortly. Thereafter, with arrangements made for the distribution of the promised supplies. As Zalter's convoy departed the human landing site, he found himself staring back at the alien vessels and the strange beings who had so casually altered the course of Cthar history. What do you make of them, Commander? Vezak asked quietly. Zalter considered the question carefully before responding. I believe we have glimpsed only the smallest fraction of what they are capable of. Their technology, their tactics, their entire approach to warfare. It's beyond anything in our experience. Are they a threat to us? Not immediately, I think. They seem sincere in their stated intentions. He paused, watching as a human shuttle lifted off, presumably returning personnel to their orbiting fleet. But long-term, they represent a fundamental shift in the balance of power in our galaxy. And they've demonstrated a willingness to annihilate entire species they deem problematic. Should we be concerned about meeting their criteria for extinction? Vezak asked, giving voice to the fear that had been forming in Zalter's mind. That, he said grimly, is a question I suspect many species will be asking in the coming years. The last human vessel departed Cthelia Prime's orbit exactly one planetary cycle after their arrival, as promised. In that time, they had maintained minimal contact with the Cthar, limiting interactions to the distribution of supplies and occasional status updates on their Xylar elimination operations. They left behind only a small automated monitoring platform in high orbit. Its purpose unclear, but presumably to provide early warning should any Xylar forces return to the system. Standing on the observation deck of the newly re-established Planetary Defense Headquarters, Zalter watched the final human dreadnought disappear in a strange spatial distortion that their sensors couldn't properly track. One moment, the massive vessel dominated the sky above. The next, it was simply gone, leaving no trace of its passage except the lingering radiation signature of its propulsion system. They've all departed, Commander, confirmed the sensor operator. Long-range scans show no human vessels within detectable range. Vezak, who had remained by his side through the tumultuous days since the human intervention, studied his expression carefully. "You seem troubled, Commander. Should we not be celebrating? The Xylar are gone. Our planet is secure. And these humans, for all their frightening power, have left us to our own devices." Zalter continued to stare at the empty space where the human ship had been. "Have they? That monitoring platform remains. And who knows what other observation methods they might possess that we cannot detect. Does it matter? They saved us." "Yes," Zalter agreed, turning away from the viewport. "They saved us. The question is, from what to what?" The rebuilding effort was already underway across Cthelia Prime. With the immediate threat removed, surviving Cthar from underground shelters had emerged to reclaim their world. The supplies provided by the humans, nutrient compounds, medical materials, and basic construction elements, had proven invaluable in supporting the initial recovery phase. More significant, though never officially acknowledged by the humans, was the technological windfall. The battlefield debris from the short but intense campaign had yielded fragments of human weapons, armor, and equipment. Cthar scientists were already reverse engineering what they could, though much of the technology involved principles that seemed to defy their current understanding of physics. "The Council is waiting, Commander," Vezak reminded him gently. Zalter nodded and followed her from the observation deck to the newly established council chambers. Once, such a meeting would have taken place in the Grand Hall of Philosophy, with its soaring crystalline dome and ancient ceremonial trappings. Now, they gathered in a hastily repurposed storage chamber, its utilitarian walls a stark reminder of how far they had fallen. The surviving members of the Imperial Advisory Council rose as Zalter entered, a pitiful remnant of what had once been the Cthar Empire's governing body. Of the traditional 35 counselors, only 11 remained, many of them bearing visible injuries from the war. "Supreme Commander," greeted Elder Thrazik, the most senior surviving counselor. "We are grateful for your presence at this critical juncture." Zalter took his place at the table. "The honor is mine, Elders. What news from the Imperial Corps?" The council members exchanged glances before Thrazik responded. "Communications with the core worlds have been re-established. The Emperor lives, though many of the royal household were lost when the Xylar breached the defenses of Homeworld. He sent his commendation for your defense of Cthelia Prime, and his curiosity regarding these humans who intervened on our behalf. I've transmitted all available data," Zalter said, "though I fear it raises more questions than it answers." "Indeed," said Counselor Vezra, head of the Science Ministry, or what remained of it. "Their technology appears to operate on principles we've theorized but never successfully implemented. Their faster-than-light method alone could revolutionize our understanding of spatial mechanics. And their weapons," added the military counselor, an old veteran named Krozif. "The destructive capacity they demonstrated exceeds our most advanced theoretical models. If we could adapt even a fraction of their technology." "That is precisely what concerns me," Zalter interrupted. "We're discussing these humans as if they were simply another technological rival to be studied and eventually matched. I'm not convinced that's possible." The council chamber fell silent. "Explain your concerns, Commander," Elder Thrazik prompted. Zalter leaned forward. "The gap between their capabilities and ours is not simply a matter of incremental advancement. Consider, they defeated in hours an enemy that nearly destroyed our civilization over 15 years. Their smallest vessels outmatched our largest battlecruisers. Their ground forces, which by all accounts numbered in the mere hundreds, eliminated millions of Xylar warriors. All the more reason to learn from them," Counselor Vezra insisted. "Learn, yes," Zalter agreed. "But we must also recognize the new reality their existence creates. For millennia, the Cthar Empire expanded through space, encountering other species, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not. We measured ourselves against these rivals and found ourselves, if not always superior, at least comparable." He paused, ensuring he had their full attention. "The humans represent something different. The technological gap is so vast that by the time we could hope to achieve parity, assuming that's even possible, they will likely have advanced even further beyond us. "What are you suggesting, Commander?" asked Elder Thrazik, his voice carrying a note of caution. "I suggest that the Cthar Empire must fundamentally reassess its place in the galactic order. We have always viewed ourselves as masters of our destiny, limited only by the challenges posed by rival empires of roughly equal capability. Now we must accept that there exists a power so far beyond our own that we could not meaningfully resist it, should it turn hostile." The council erupted in protests and objections. The Cthar had always prided themselves on their independence and martial prowess. To suggest they were essentially powerless before another species was anathema to their cultural identity. "You go too far, Commander," Counselor Krozeth growled. "These humans are powerful, yes, but they are not gods. They bleed, they die." Some of our observers reported casualties among their ground forces. "Minimal casualties," Zalter corrected, "and sustained primarily because they prioritized speed of execution over force protection. Had they been more cautious, I doubt they would have lost anyone at all." "What would you have us do?" demanded another counselor. "Surrender our sovereignty? Acknowledge these humans as our superiors?" "No," Zalter said firmly. "I would have us survive and rebuild, but with clear eyes about the new reality we face." The humans departed peacefully this time. They considered the Xylar a threat, and us. What? An endangered species to be preserved? A potential future ally? A curiosity? We don't know. But their attitude toward us will shape our future far more than our own capabilities or intentions. Elder Thrazik raised a hand for silence, his ancient eyes studying Zalter thoughtfully. "You've given this considerable thought, Commander. Do you have specific recommendations for the Council?" Zalter had indeed spent many sleepless cycles contemplating this question. "First, we must accelerate our recovery efforts, focusing on re-establishing our core infrastructure and agricultural base. Second, we should carefully study all available information about human technology, culture, and behavior, but avoid any actions that might be perceived as threatening or provocative." He took a deep breath before continuing. "Third, and perhaps most importantly, we should reconsider our traditional imperial posture. The Cthar Empire has historically been expansionist, viewing other species as either potential subjects or rivals. In a galaxy that includes the humans, such an approach may be unwise." "You advocate appeasement?" Krozeth asked, his tone making the word an accusation. "I advocate survival," Zalter replied evenly. "The Xylar nearly destroyed us by force. The humans saved us also by force. Both demonstrated power far beyond our own. The difference is that the humans, for whatever reason, chose to help rather than harm us. I suggest we give them no reason to reconsider that choice." The debate continued for hours, with positions gradually forming along predictable lines. The military counselors advocated for rapid rearmament and reverse engineering of human technology. The scientific faction pushed for establishing direct contact with the humans to request knowledge exchange. The traditionalists insisted on maintaining Cthar independence and cultural identity regardless of the potential consequences. Through it all, Zalter listened more than he spoke. The Cthar Empire stood at a crossroads, and the path they chose would determine not just their recovery from the Xylar War, but their entire future in a galaxy that had suddenly become much more dangerous and unpredictable. As the council session finally adjourned, Elder Thrazik approached Zalter privately. The ancient Cthar scales had dulled with age, and the recent hardships had carved deep lines into his face, but his eyes remained sharp and penetrating. "Your words troubled the council, Commander," he said quietly. "But they needed to hear them. Few have the courage to speak uncomfortable truths." Zalter acknowledged the compliment with a respectful tilt of his head. "I fear I may still have understated the situation, Elder. Oh, the humans who came here, their fleet, their forces, I suspect they represent only a tiny fraction of their true capabilities. They spoke of protocols and standard responses. This was routine for them, Elder. Routine. Thrazik contemplated this for a long moment before responding. When I was a hatchling, my clutch mother told me stories of the ancient days, before the Cthar reached for the stars. Our ancestors believed the night sky was the scales of a great celestial dragon, and that the stars were merely light reflecting off those scales. The elder's gaze drifted upward, as if he could see through the ceiling to the stars beyond. They believed we lived in the shadow of beings so vast and powerful that we could barely comprehend their existence. Perhaps, in their primitive way, they understood something we, with all our technology and empire building, had forgotten. That we are not the apex of creation, Zalter murmured. Indeed, the Xylar taught us we could fail. The humans have taught us we can be overshadowed. The elder placed a gnarled hand on Zalter's shoulder. It is a humbling lesson, but perhaps a necessary one. As Zalter left the council chambers, he found Vezak waiting for him in the corridor. The technicians have finished analyzing the data from the human monitoring platform, she reported. It appears to be primarily focused on detecting Xylar bioenergy signatures, but it also maintains a continuous subspace transmission to somewhere beyond our detection range. They're watching us, Zalter said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Commander. The question is, what are they watching for? Zalter had no answer. As they walked together toward the command center, his gaze was drawn to a viewport that offered a view of Cthelia Prime's night side. Cities that had once blazed with light now showed only scattered illumination, pockets of civilization in a landscape of darkness. But there were lights where days ago there had been none. Life continued. Rebuilding had begun. In the blackness of space above, invisible to the naked eye, but always present in Zalter's thoughts, was the human monitoring platform. A silent sentinel, a reminder of the day when humans joined the war and it ended in hours. What that day truly meant for the future of the Cthar Empire, and indeed for all species in the galaxy, remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. The universe had become a much larger, more complex, and more dangerous place than they had ever imagined. And somewhere out there, watching from the shadows, were the humans, with their terrible efficiency and their clinical detachment, waiting to see what would unfold next. Zalter only hoped that whatever path the Cthar chose, it would keep them firmly classified as something other than vermin in human taxonomy. Because he had seen what happened to species that earned that designation, and the memory would haunt him for the rest of his days.